Season's greetings, everyone. This is the first time I remember doing like a tier list, so it's coming up to the end of the year. I think we've had a really good year for KOFAS. There've just been so many new characters released, so many new units that have completely changed up the meta. And I thought it would be a good time to just go through the tier list that was just released on the QF unofficial Discord, and walk through some of the placements of the units. And feel free to argue with me if you think any of these are not in the right place, but this is where we thought it should be. And I took into account some of the feedback from the rest of the members on the Meta Council. Before I go ahead with everything, you're invited to join the QF All Star unofficial Discord. This is a great community. In fact, everyone there is just really friendly and always really happy to help you. If you have the chance, you can join the Discord on the link that I'll be posting up on the description of this video. Before we head into the tier list, however, I am going to go through a few ground rules. The first one is that tier lists are just not gospel truth. They're entirely subjective. So you absolutely feel free to argue with me if you don't think something should be in one particular location, right? That's what it's meant to do. You're supposed to use tier lists to discuss with each other, and feel free to do that. Now, the way this tier list was ranked is based on the very simple question of who should I prioritize in terms of building, or who should I build first? And this really assumes that you have the necessary resources to do it. So if you have the rubies to pull one of the new like BS revamped units to A5, by all means, that could be exactly what you want to do. And of course, a lot of these units are already limited. This year was the year of limited units, so you are not able to get a lot of these anymore. In fact, some of the collab units are just never coming back again. But if you're lucky to have some of these in your arsenal, by all means, build them out. How we've been looking at each of these units is in two general criterions, right? So criteria, right? So that would be your damage output, DPS, and then you have utility. This could include other PvE game modes like Immortals, Time Attack, Demos Base, and Guild Raid as well. All of these combined together, that gives us an idea of how I would prioritize building each of these units. And last but not least, lists are ranked in order, right? So unlike other tier lists where everyone in the same tier might have exactly the same kind of power level, I tried to do that for this tier list. So they are in descending order in the same tier. And I'll try and explain how these came to be. But by and large, between different units in the same tier, you're not going to expect too much of a disparity in terms of their power level or utility. All right, now on to the tier list. We're going to start off with the lowest tier, D tier in this case. And what you're going to see is a bunch of units that are coming from the very early stages of our BS and SS tier list, right? One thing to note is that you're not going to see too many unified banner units in here. In fact, there are no unified banner units in here because this year BS, SS collabs, they've completely outclassed them. And also, there haven't really been any new like unified banner units worth speaking of. I think there was Lin at the start of the year, so that doesn't really matter. He's nowhere near this tier list. So even the worst BSSS slash collab units of this year are going to outclass your unified banner units. So that's something you want to keep in mind. Right, so D tier. Here we have SS Iori, Athena, Marie Rose, Orochi, as well as Maxima. So all of these D tier units are just so far back in terms of damage that they don't really compare with the rest of the tiers in terms of how they're able to output damage quite as much. They each individually still have their strengths because they do provide certain unique dots. For instance, SS Iori is a great source of darkness, and he also does have a pretty long 3PG. Maxima is supposed to have some use in terms of time attack, but we haven't really seen that happen. Orochi, Marie Rose, as well as Athena, they do really terrible damage. It's hard to speak about them without thinking of how bad the damage is. And this is largely in part thanks to pretty outdated animations. There's no canceling back in those days when they were released, or rather, the canceling was just not built into their movesets. There you have it. That's the tier list. They don't have the damage to compete. I wouldn't really prioritize building any of these guys because you build them for the damage, not just for utility alone. Now we go on to the C tier. Here you're going to find two of SS Volume 1 and BS Volume 1 units. So you have your Mai and BS Rugal. That's a pattern here because you can also see there are banner sharing units at D tier as well. So they're still doing all right in terms of damage, but they don't add that much more utility beyond that because BS Rugal, his animations are just not great in terms of how the multi-hits work. It's not going to lower the guild raid boss shield that much. And then, of course, you have Mai, who is actually pretty decent at lowering the guild raid boss shield, but she doesn't do quite that much damage anymore either. So among this tier, I would say these guys are still doing okay damage, but they're not that fantastic. For Zero, he is an interesting one because he's a fairly recent BS thanks to Epic Quest 2. In this case, he has this really slow moving lion, which is almost a meme. And that kind of does make him not quite as good enough to compete with the rest of the super fast animations that you're going to see in the higher tiers. And SSK Dash, this guy, his damage was lacking right from the start, and he has not aged well. Unfortunately, he was immediately outclassed in the next banner, in fact, which was BS Volume 4. On the B tier, we have SS Kula. Yeah, I think she's doing pretty well because of the multi hits that she does, and also the shield that she also has. She kind of stands quite different from SSK Dash because also she provides that kind of chill burst, and so many different hits. So built a certain way, she can actually out DPS the next guy on the list, which is Kyo. So Kyo, how far he's fallen? Once upon a time he was right on top of the meta. Right now he's still doing pretty fantastic damage, but his dot just quite isn't quite as relevant anymore. And this goes the same for SS Honoka. I would kind of look at them fairly similarly. They're both yellow. They both do burn dots. They both focus on dealing a chunk of damage. And in fact, when SS Honoka first came out during the DOA collab, he was doing pretty much she was doing pretty much the same damage as SSKO, right? So they're still doing all right, but I wouldn't rank them all the way up there as you're gonna see a bit later on. So May is an interesting inclusion in the list, and this is one of the first non-BS/SS units you're going to see. She came out with, of course, the Guilty Gear collab, and she's doing really really well. Her damage, I think, would be pretty much on par with some of the lower ranked SS units. She's got her chill with and freeze, which is really useful for immortal Typhon, right? Which requires a chill unit as well as a freeze unit. And in general, I really like her leadership skill, which is of course the one that gives all Guilty Gear characters 3% PG gain PG on kill, which is of course so always very useful for time attack. Right, and rounding up the B tier, we've got Neo Tengu and Kasumi, the headliners for the DOA collab. Uh, these two units, of course, were fantastic in their time. Neo Tengu just barely edged out Kasumi in terms of how her damage was viewed, and of course, her cooldown reduction was extremely valued back in its day. Kasumi also was a fantastic unit to be using for guild raid. Her 3PG lasted long, and she also dealt shock damage. So her damage was not too bad right at the start. However, of course, these units have all aged quite a bit, and we're going to go on to the A tier. The A tier is going to be our longest tier. The reason for this is because there are just so many great units out there right now, and they're all ranking really highly in terms of damage. And you can probably tell as well that a lot of these units very recently just came out. So you can compare them amongst each other. You can tell how quickly the power creep has been going when it comes to this game as well. We're going to start from the bottom of A tier. Let's talk about Yuri as well as Geese. They're the same color. They're the same color type, in fact. Oh, in fact, we have three of the same color types in here, including Ino. But let's just talk about Yuri and Geese first. They're very, very similar in terms of how great their leadership skills are. That's a large part of the reason why they're in A tier. Both Geese and Yuri have 45% attack boost to the relevant types. For Geese, it's attack units. For Yuri, it's all stars, which is everything on this list. And that very, very valued 20% power gain rate. So this makes them both really fantastic for Immortals and also explains why they're featured here. Right now, after the buffs, previously Geese's damage was terrible. His animations were still awful even after his very quick buff as soon as he was released. But his animations are still not fantastic. So he used to do pretty bad damage after the very recent buffs to the BS Volume 2 and 3 units. He is now doing pretty fantastic damage. In fact, one of the tests I've seen brought him up 85% in terms of his damage. So he's doing 85% more damage than he used to. And here we have Yuri as well. Her damage was never bad, but in her case, also one of the things that was kind of jimping her was her animations. So that's why even though they're at the bottom of the A tier, they're still pretty fantastic units in their own right. Similar units in terms of like animations are not that fantastic, but they're doing a good chunk of damage. These would be Baiken as well as King. Both of them bring in pretty interesting dots. Baiken brings in lightning as well as bleed, and King brings in darkness, and both of them deal pretty fantastic damage. That's just why you're going to find them in this part of the A tier list. For Baiken and King both, they don't have shield. Uh, Baiken arguably does kind of have a shield, the PvP based one, but both Baiken and King don't have shield, which kind of holds them back a bit. One of the most interesting parts of the A tier list, and he's not here because of damage, that would be BS Original Zero. So, as most of you might know, BS Original Zero does fantastic, amazing things in time attack because of his extremely, extremely long 3PG, as well as his pretty long core, which mimics the normal 5PG on most zeros. So, for BS Zero in particular, he is here not because of his damage. His damage is actually middling. I think I would put him somewhere along the B tier for damage, but his utility in terms of time attack is unmatched. I would say Zero is in fact the god of time attack. So if you need a unit that can solo time attack for you, this is the guy. Caveat is, of course, when you're using BS Zero, you do need Original Zero to serve as his striker. Or I think it also works with Billy, New Year's Eve Billy. Yeah, now we have two Guilty Gear units here. I rank them pretty closely to each other because they both offer incredible damage, and they're really useful in Demu's base as well because of how close they are in terms of damage to and utility-wise to some of the current BS and SS units. So as you know, in Demo's base, you can only use one BS or SS unit when it comes to these boss stages. So it's really useful to bring either these two along or with Mei as well because of how much they can firepower they can add while not being too much of a liability, not being a BS or SS unit. Ino suffers a bit in terms of guild rate because of her explode on her poison. So the only way I seem to have made it work is basically going into awakening and spamming the buttons because she does have a 2-second cooldown on poison explode. But otherwise, I wouldn't really count on her for poison as well. Which brings me back to another point, which is that out of all these units, you're going to see that BS0 is the only poison user in this list, which is really critical because he's the only one with poison on his skills in this list, and that makes him pretty useful for Lunatic Geese Guild Raid. And we move on into the really exciting parts. Here we have Gainitz, BS Gainitz. Just like his normal Unified Banner counterpart, he does a whole chunk of damage, a lot of hits, and that makes him really useful when it comes to Guild Raid, of course, in terms of building down, like whittling down the shield really quickly. He's also very useful in terms of how he's got his shield around him. So his own personal shield makes it such that he doesn't immediately get gibbed, like jibbed whenever you go into Guild Raid and they do their smashes or insta kills or whatever. So I would rank him really highly as well. Unfortunately, his leader skill is a bit niche. It only provides 60%, 65% attack to red units, and that does kind of mean you have to run a red team if you want to use him as a leader. At the same time, though, he does have a pretty long 3PG, and that does make him fairly useful for, again, Immortals or Guild Raid. We come to our first free unit on this list, I gotta say, yeah, that is the first free unit on this list, and that is BS Ignis, EQ Ignis, in fact. So he's on this list. A lot of you might not have him yet because of the immense amount of grinding you need to do in order to get him. But when you do get him, I'll say it's worth it to build him up just because of his ability to do Starlight and Darkness damage, which are two fairly niche dots as of now. And if you recall, of course, Starlight and Darkness damage is really helpful for Expert as well as Lunatic Rugal. That's for Guild Raid. And he does a lot of damage as well. And he also comes with a shield on active skill use. So although his animations are just that little bit dated, he still does an amazing amount of damage, and I will rank him right up there on this list as well, just so that he can be used to beat out like Guild Raid. And of course, he benefits from the 3PG, either from Volume 2, which is still ongoing actually, and the EQ 3PG. It doesn't really matter all that much which one you use because they are almost the same length and duration. The second free unit on this list, on this tier actually, would be So Bad Guy. So he was a surprise. We didn't expect him to be as good as he was, being a free unit. And most people could actually get him to A3. So if you've got him, he's definitely worth getting to A3, building up with the right stones, because he does a chunk of damage. Built correctly, So Bad Guy does the most damage out of any unit in the game right now. Right, and of course that's caveated that you build him correctly with SS Volume 3 set, as well as the correct option cards. There are going to be other videos that explain that. I'm pretty sure you can find those. So he's not that fantastic for shield breaking in terms of like guild rate, just because like he doesn't come with a very useful dot, right? His dot is the very common burn dot, and the problem with So Bad Guy is that his burn dot also instantly explodes. So same kind of scenario as even though you've got like a really cool dot, you can't really exploit it all that much because it just gets exploded almost every time you use it. Again, he does a massive amount of damage, and that's during Awakening. So if you do build him up, definitely recommend using him in whatever modes that you might want to do a lot of damage in, which is of course including Immortals as well. One thing to note about him is that his 3PG is extremely long and it lasts for like I don't know ages. So you can definitely use that within the context of either Guild Raid, Immortals. He's not quite that useful in time attack though. Now topping off the list would be BS Ignis, the original BS Ignis, not the EQ one. And he's right here again because of the buffs he's just gotten, the one that we just got with the 20 million downloads banner. He's still doing fantastic damage, but one important thing about him is always his CDR core, which reduces the cooldown of when he does basic of his skills when he does basic attacks. So that's really useful in any game mode. He can still solo things like Lunatic Geese, as well as with Darkness, he can also solo Expert Rugal, of course. And I would definitely recommend using him for those modes. He's still a beast, and that's Ignis for you. He's been great since BS Volume 3. He still continues to be great after his buffs this time around. All right, now we're going to be moving on into our next tier, which is the which is the S tier. Not everything here is SS, and it contains 2 units, just 2 units. The first one I'm going to talk about is Shizuru, and for her, she is probably one of the best free units we've ever gotten, and we've gotten a bunch of free units already that are really fantastic. On this list, you've got Honoka, you've got Soul Bad Guy, and now you have SS Shizuru, who was just recently given out for free thanks to the Lucky Board. As long as you've logged in constantly and done all the quests for 14 days, you should have her at least at A2. I wish I had her at A3, but A2 is pretty good as well. So she's right here because of her massive damage, but more importantly, it's because of how she's able to absolutely dominate time attack. We already know that Shizuru is fantastic for time attack. Time attack strategies consistently feature her because of the 3PG that comes from EQ and the way that she's able to generate a bunch of PG in order to use that 3PG. right? So in this case, SS Chizuru actually has even more skills that increase PG gain rate and add PG onto the rest of the team as well. So that's a skill that used to be only found on 98 Yuri as well as Maxima all the way in the bottom over here. But here we're pretty confident she will be widely used in time attack, even though there haven't been any like Master Rugal time attacks featuring defense yet. But she will definitely be used because of all of these really cool PG to the entire team skills, right? And on top of that, her leader skill itself gives 5% PG every time you use a blast skill. So we have yet to see how that's going to work out exactly, but already she can instantly replace any Chizuru on any team that could have used her. Right? So we're really looking forward to how she's going to perform in time attack. Now, that's not to say that her damage isn't fantastic as well. In fact, she's doing damage along the levels of some of the other two, like the SS tier units. I'm guessing by now you already know who they are, but she's doing damage along the levels of those guys. Definitely, I would think she ranks right up there with them in terms of the damage output, thanks to her two Starlight dots, because they don't count as the same dot, they explode differently as well. So yeah, build up Shizuru if you have her, you won't regret it. The only problem with Shizuru in this case, I think, would be her stones. She doesn't come with SS stones. You will have to use guild rate stones for her, or just wait for better ones. It's fine. You don't have to worry about those that much. I think she also does quite well with her set, which comes along with the Rush event dungeon that's currently ongoing. Plus, of course, you definitely want to use her option card, which gives 30% defense as attack. Right, that's done for Chizuru, and now we have the undisputed winner of this round of buffs for the BS Volume 2, BS Volume 3 rerun banner. So Chrysalid, here BS Chrysalid actually got a cooldown reduction core on him, which allows him to reduce his active skill cooldowns by 0.5 seconds every time he hits something under the effects of Starlight and Darkness, which are his two main dots. So you already know from the earlier part in this video that Starlight and Darkness are really well valued in terms of how we approach guild raid, but at the same time, Chrysalid has the cooldown reduction core that affects his active skill cooldowns when he uses skills on something, or rather when he attacks something that has Starlight or Darkness on them. This is so important because it turns him into a massive like skill spamming machine. So what you're supposed to do with him is that you just apply your Starlight or Darkness dot, and you can awaken or whatever, and then after you just go S2, S3, S2, S3, S2, S3, and you do this so quickly that you rack up a whole chunk of damage. So Chrysalid, when he was first released, was already the star out of BS Volume 2, just because of how bad Geese was back then. But now he's gone above and beyond that. He can effectively solo Lunatic Rugal as well as Expert Rugal uh, because of how he's able to just output so much damage together with his Darkness. And he eats through shield like nothing. So Chrysalid, huge winner. The only downside to him, I think, would be his very short 3PG, which in some cases is also a good thing. He's also not that useful in time attack, so don't think about it. All right, now we head on into our SS tier. And our SS tier, here we've got two very, very cool units. BS Leona as well as SS Dizzy from the Guilty Gear collaboration. So the reason why I've ranked these two up here is not just because of their massive amounts of damage. They're still definitely in the top 5 in terms of sheer damage output, but in terms of their general utility as well. So by this point, you probably already know that I rate cooldown reduction cores pretty highly, and both of these units have cooldown reduction cores. Disease and Leona's both do it when you use and when you hit your opponent when they are like affected by one of their dots. So Leona is really fantastic because she comes in at a point where she's able to do a whole chunk of fantastic damage thanks to all of her skills being used together and the cooldown reduction core. But at the same time, she does have her shield as well. So upon hit, she basically doesn't need to take damage in guild raid at all. This comes in very helpful in the latest and greatest game mode called Demo's Base. It allows you to survive a lot of things that otherwise might have dealt you a whole bunch of damage, and it also lets you last through all of that really annoying dots as well. So Leona, still up there, one of the only ways you can beat Demo's Base without having to pull a whole bunch of shenanigans. So she really, really is up there in terms of how I would view her in terms of utility and damage. Now, last but not least, we're going to go through Dizzy. So Dizzy was definitely the chase of the Guilty Gear collab for me. All of her skills are blast skills, which really makes blast stones really valuable on her. She also does an amazing amount of damage thanks to her double explodes. For me, I think the correct way to use her skills during Awakening would be 1132. And there is this really odd quirk where if you tap three fast enough after the 1-1, you actually still retain the burn dot on her. So that is really quite useful in terms of outputting even more damage. For Dizzy though, even though she doesn't have the typical regular PvE shield, what she does have is ranged attacks. And with her ranged attacks and her constant explodes, she's able to range out most things in Demo's base, which allows you to clear levels, the very late levels with a lot of ease. And there you have it. That's the tier list for 2021. Tell me what you think of this tier list. Did you disagree with me? Do you agree with me for any of these lists? Do you agree with my choice for the top 2 units of this entire year? Let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, please do let me know if you have any feedback for me or if you want me to go in depth into any of these units as well. I'll try to do what I can. In the meantime, though, thanks for watching and happy holidays to you. Bye.